That didn't work. I'll just blow my hair in my face. She's like, what are you doing, Mom? What are you doing, Mommy? Okay. I'm sorry. Hiyori was like one of my favorite effing characters in Wano. So, time to talk about Hiyori as masked as Komurasaki. So, where I left off in the last video for Hiyori, she had kind of taken up the identity as Komurasaki, kind of hidden in plain sight to a degree in regards to, being, taken in by Kiroshiro, Denjiro in the form of, in the guise of Kiroshiro, and then raised to be a geisha, be an oiran, and all of that stuff. So she went through all of that training and everything, worked her way up and probably legitimately earned her way to being, the highest ranked geisha, oiran, courtesan, however they want to put it, in Wano. And, earned her way to that title. And also in the process ended up conning a lot of men out of their money, which I will be talking about. So we kind of get that in the little flashback where we have her explaining what happened, how she ended up in that situation and everything. And how it was a way to protect her from Orochi because she's hidden in plain sight and all of that stuff. So we have all of that. Bit of trivia. So the way that she is portrayed here as Komurasaki, it might be based off of an Edo era tragic love story that is immortalized in one of the paintings by Kitagawa Utamaru, I apologize. The lovers Miura ya Komurasagi and Shirai Konpachi. I apologize. And it's essentially just, it's a very tragic love story. So with a lot of backstabbing to a degree happening in the process, or front stabbing, depending on how things are done. But so that's kind of where this, where that kind of came from. So we don't know specifically when she became the highest ranked courtesan or the highest ranked geisha in Wano, but it was probably a couple of years ago. And it probably ended up just because Hiyori is 26 years old. They probably portrayed Komurasaki as being about the same age, maybe a year older or a year younger, depending on however they were trying to aim for that. Just to, kind of distance her even more from potentially being Hiyori. And, she worked her way up. She became one of the courtesans. I'm thinking that maybe Denjiro as Kiroshiro maybe helped a little bit, but I think she probably put in a lot of the work herself. And eventually what ended up happening is she ends up just her immense beauty and charisma and charm and all that stuff is what earns her this favor of so many people. It's whenever we see her out in public, when we're first introduced to her, which I'll get to, during the procession on the way to the palace, and everybody's just oh my god, she's shining and brilliant and beautiful and everything like that. It's very similar to the way that we see that, people react to Boa Hancock, or now that, when we were, during the Rocks flashback, the way people were reacting to Gloriosa and Shocky and such, where it's just oh my god, they're so beautiful, and the sun's radiance pales in comparison to their beauty, type of a thing. Is the way that it's kind of portrayed. And Komurasaki gives off that same vibe for the way that she acts. And so we get a lot of that. We that's what she's been doing. But she also has, been endearing herself to Orochi, earning his favor. She also has just been conning a ton of men out of their money. Now, it would be one thing if these were like honest, hardworking men that she was conning out of their money, but that's not the case. These are horrible men who do horrible things to get their money and to make other people lose their money, and she's taking the money away from them. So the main three that we see this happen to are Bingo, Bongo, and Bungo. And they're these three men who essentially have like this scheme going where, they essentially have like, there's like a arson and other stuff going on that they do, and then like they all commit into this cycle of just like running other families out of their money and everything else like that to just like get as much money as possible for themselves. And Komurasaki goes through and she essentially cons every single one of them out of their money by playing up the I just want my freedom. I don't want to be a geisha anymore. I don't want to be an Oiron anymore. I don't want to be here anymore. I want to be with you. You are the one who makes me feel safe and loved and protected and I dream every night of being free. And like that's what she does to them. And she just like charms them and everything, and I love it. And I love what they do with the Komurasaki, because that's who she is at this point in time. How they do this like flip with her, where it's like we get this introduction to her as like this beautiful woman, and like we're also getting the story at the same time of like how she conned these men out of their money and out of their livelihoods and everything else like that, and just as horrible as these men could be, just to give her the money. And they're like, here, I brought more money for you so you can set it aside to buy your freedom. She's like, oh, thank you. We're so close now. We don't need much more. Well, soon I'll be able to be with you and we'll be happy, type of a thing. It's like, they go through all of that. And like, she just keeps the money. And then like, they show back up again. It's just like, I brought the last bit, Komurasaki. I'm here to buy your freedom. Why would you buy my freedom? I'm perfectly happy here. It's like, oh, that money you brought me? Oh, I spent that because it was mine. You gave it to me. And she just like plays them for suckers. And the thing is that she's been doing this to multiple men for years. And so many of them keep falling for it because she's so beautiful and so charming and such a good actress. And it's just like, oh my god, type of a thing of just like, oh god, she's conned so many men to the money. Now, to be fair, she is technically keeping the money, but then she's giving it to Denjiro to go be like the midnight bandit or whatever, and like drop the money off with like the poor, with like the people in Okabore town and Ebisu town and stuff like that, and probably giving some of the money to Yasuie to help with Ebisu town and stuff like that. In those regards, is like what they're using. If they're using the money that she gets in order to give back to the poor in that regard, they probably keep a little bit of it just for the purposes of having to keep like the guys up of Kurosho running his Yakuza clan and everything else like that, and running the brothels and that type of stuff. But most of the money goes to like back to like the people who got conned out of it, type of a thing, who like got their money not conned away from them but like taken from them by Bingo, Bongo, and Bungo. And so she just has like a ton of fun. Like, I bet she loved playing this game because it is literally like a cat with a mouse as a toy is the way that she treats these men, and I love it. Now, to be fair, there were lots of geisha who essentially did similar things, but they did it for like less heartfelt reasons. They did it literally to get money for themselves, and then eventually it would just result in be like, oh, well, it's my money, so yeah, I'm free now. I have no debt to you. You gave me the money, type of a thing. So I just love how they play that. How like Oda wrote that in there and just made her just like this, cons all of these men, so many of these men out of their money, and like, and then and then it comes back to bite them in the ass again anyway, because then we have it. So it's like we have that going on. We also know at some point in time during this time frame, she ended up getting Toko as her Kamaru, who was like the apprentice geisha for her to train. That Yasue took Toko to the brothel and sold her there. And essentially, from his perspective, as I went over in Toko's video, it was like he's putting her there because she'll be safer there. She'll be fed, she'll be clothed, she'll have a nice place to sleep. And thankfully, she ends up with Komurasaki. And as I said, I still kind of think that maybe Yasue figured out that Komurasaki was Hiyori because he would have met Hiyori as a child. And then maybe he revealed his identity to her. Possibly, I'm not sure. That's a debatable thing. I'm not sure about that. If that's ever been confirmed one way or the other, I don't believe so. But that's just like headcanon to me. And I guess it's possible that Denjiro recognized him. That's a possibility. Again, don't know. Maybe. And what ends up happening is, of course, Komurasaki has, Toko as her apprentice, as her Kamaru. And so she goes through all of that stuff and takes care of Toko and is like training her and everything else like that. We see her, training Toko to play the biwa and everything else like that. And all of that. We also know that there are various points in time where Komurasaki as Hiyori and Denjiro, Kiyoshiro as Denjiro, have conversation where he's like, you need to remember to wear the blood packs. So that way, just in case, we're ready. And that is, of course, because they know that at some point they're going to have to fake Komurasaki's death. And that's kind of part of their plan. And with, like, the rumblings going on of, maybe there is rebellion coming type of a thing. Side note, something that I did not point out. There is the moment in Wano where we find out from Ashura Doji about the previous time, the 10 years in the past, when a bunch of the samurai and such tried to go to Wano and try to do the raid on Onigashima then, and they failed. I kind of wonder if Hiyori ever knew about that. She would have been about 16 at the time when it happened. And she may have heard about it because we don't know how much of a news that would have been. There would have been a lot of samurai that left and that did not come back because they would have been taken out by Kaido and his forces. But there is kind of that thought there of like, I wonder how much they heard about that. But we do know that, that Komurasaki, like, she wears the blood packs underneath her robes and everything else like that, underneath her kimono. So that way, should the time come, they can fake her death and everything. If the situation requires it. Then we get to the Komurasaki's introduction into the arc. And what ends up happening is, it's like, technically we have, like, heard of Hiyori at this point in time. We've heard about Hiyori, but we don't exactly know. I mean, it's theorized that she's still alive based upon what we find out. But we don't exactly know, like, where she would have been. But, like, almost as soon as Komurasaki is introduced, it's like, oh, she's probably Hiyori. Is, like, essentially, like, the whole fan theory generator thing going on there. Someone hit the nail on the head. It's just like, oh, she's Hiyori. She's definitely Hiyori. Mysterious woman who's exceedingly beautiful has entered the spotlight, and we have heard about Hiyori, so probably gonna be Hiyori. Oh, her name's Komurasaki. Oh, well, it's fake names. Not like that's never been done in One Piece before. Okay, at the very, very least... Sorry, boo. At the very, very least, Hiyori had a better idea of how to go undercover than CP9. Because Lucci, Kaku, Stussy, and Blue Note, they did not change their names when they went undercover in Galley Law and in Water 7. They just kept their dang names. Same thing with Stussy to a degree, but she was much more embedded and much less known as a member of CP0. But, like, the CP9 agents, I'm like, y'all didn't even change your names when you went into your mission on Water 7, and now look at what happens. You're like, you can't go undercover ever again. Everybody knows your names, type of a thing. But like Hiyori at least was like, Hiyori and Denjiro was like, okay, we're gonna change your name to something else. We're gonna have you not be called Hiyori because that's just stupid in this case. Because that's just gonna be like a big red beacon of, come and get the heir to the throne here. So we're going to call you Komurasaki. So essentially that's what happens. But, the beginning where we finally see her is when first we're kind of introduced to her via Toko, which I like because we've just met Toko. Like either the previous chapter or earlier in this chapter, how it's set up. Where Toko met Sanji, Robin, Usopp, and Brook. Frankie, not Brooke. She'll meet Brooke later. Met them and like had the whole soba incident and everything. Got food, and then she has to run off to go get into the procession. And like, we see her get there and like we see her being really excited. To be fair, Toko is like excitable about everything. Also, smile, unfortunately. And like we kind of see like, Komurasaki kind of, like tap Toko on the head to a degree, be kind of affectionate to her. And then, like, we see them doing this, great procession through the streets of Wano from the brothel all the way to the flower capital. And this is where we have, like, all of the citizens are just like, oh my god, she's so beautiful. She's the most beautiful woman in the world. She's even more, type of thing. And I don't know, because we know very little about how much the people of Wano, they know very little about the outside world, so it's like, they're not going to know who Boa Hancock is. They're not going to know who, like, Shirahoshi is, in the Ryugu Kingdom and everything. They're not going to know those people. They're not going to know how beautiful those women are supposed to be. But they're like, oh, Hiyori, Komurasaki is the most beautiful geisha in all of Wano. She's the most beautiful woman in all of Wano. And it's just like men and women just like, oh, like the same way that we see with, with Hancock and Gloriosa and Shaki and stuff like that. The same way that we see that stuff. So I love that. Hiyori gets those same reactions. And as they're going through, on their way to the castle, on their way to the palace, they end up coming across they are confronted by Bingo Bongo and Bungo, who decided that they're going to show up and try to kill her to get revenge for their destitution. But like her guards defeat them very easily, which is just like, yeah, you guys are freaking old men who clearly have not ever trained a day in your lives. And they get taken out very quickly. But even then, they can't bring themselves to, like, actually do the act of trying to kill her. And then she just laughs at them. She just laughs at them as they just cry in anguish, and she just mocks them and disregards them as they just like, you're just nothing but, like, dirt at my feet, essentially, is the way that she treats them. Which is exactly what they are. They're horrible, horrible humans. And they get to the flower capital, the flower castle, they get to Orochi's palace, where it is now time for the party, for the big banquet that Orochi is throwing. And, they're there, and eventually they get to, she's taken and she's sitting next to Orochi as, like, one of the guests and everything else like that to keep him happy. And, he just fawns all over her, which the thing that I also point out is, like, just how good of an effing actress Hiyori has to be to get through all of this crap. That for the last, not just this party, but every single frickin' party that she has had to go to over the last however many years as Komurasaki, having to be sat next to Orochi, having to be fondled by him, having to be fawned upon by him, all of this stuff. And she goes through all of this again and again and again. And, like, yeah, conning other men out of their money. She probably just has other clients that she, like, legitimately likes. We know at some point in time that, like, Queen was a client of hers as well. And then he was so depressed when she died. that he tried to go after one of the other geisha. And the conclusion of that happened in the Sanji, the Sanji's battle on Onigashima with Queen was resolved there. But Komurasaki probably just had other clients that she legitimately liked and like didn't try to con them out of their money. And maybe even since they were ones who like she liked and who were like legitimately nice to her and stuff like that, maybe they got a little bit of a discount. Maybe, I don't know. But like just how much she would have to go through when it would come to being around Orochi specifically, Queen to a degree, but like Orochi specifically, because he is the reason that she is in this situation. He is the reason her father is dead. Her mother is dead. Her country is in this horrible, horrible pit of poison that he has put it in over the past 20-something years during his reign. Same thing with Kaido. That Orochi is this poison that I talked about in the Orochi videos. Or like just this poison that he has put into Wano and all this pain and suffering that he has brought to Wano. And she just has to sit there and like flirt with him and be like, oh, Lord Orochi, just like all of that stuff. And she just has to play that up. And I just look at that and I'm just like, oh my God, girl, please get therapy. Please, please, please get therapy. Because I can assure you, there are probably nights where she would get home back to the brothel after all of this was finished, and she would probably just lay down in her room after she's had all of her makeup and hair and everything undone, and she's out of her fancy kimonos and everything else like that, and she's just like in her nightgown, and she probably just lays down and cries. And I don't think anyone would blame her, as I think I said in the Denjiro videos, where she probably just like, he comes in like as the guise of like, spending the evening with her type of thing, or being called to his office or whatever. She just probably sits there with like her head in his lap and just cries as he just like comforts her as like an uncle. Because that, as a guardian in that regard. And, she just like cries or whatever. And I would not blame her in the slightest, and neither would Denjiro, and nobody else would as well. And I do hope, and I'll probably touch on this when I get to the third part, which is going to be Onigashima and then everything after. I really freaking hope that her and Momonosuke sit down and end up having like some very serious talks as to what they have both gone through. Because I wish that was something that they would aim a little bit more on in One Piece, was like therapy. But I don't know of any legitimate therapist in One Piece. I don't know. I kind of want there to be like a therapist somewhere. The therapist is the One Piece. That's what it is. The One Piece is a therapist. I don't know, maybe. But back to this. So they're at the party, and she's having to flirt and be fawned over and everything like that by Orochi and by everyone else there. And of course, she gets up and she plays her song. And we have it that, like, the one time that she cannot keep her mask in place is when she's playing the Moon Princess song. So she always has to put on, like, her Kitsune mask that she wears. And, of course, the way that we're introduced to Hiyori as, to Komurasaki through the story is, like, she's there as, like, the intros and the outros when, like, we're being introduced to Wano, and then, everything like that was her playing her biwa and everything else like that. And in the anime, they do the same thing. So that's kind of how we're introduced to her that way. As like this through line with her and her music. Another way that music is very important in One Piece. And like that's the one time she cannot keep her mask up, because that song was also her father's favorite song. And she cannot cry. She cannot prevent herself from crying while she plays it. So she wears the mask to hide it. To hide that she is crying. And then she will then, after she is all done playing and has like composed herself again, she will remove the mask and go back to being the, oh, Lord Orochi, just like all of that. And like, so that's essentially how that's done. And what ends up happening is, she plays and everything else like that. Robin is also at this party as like the geisha Orabi. So what ends up happening is there's a couple of people who are like making fun of Orochi because of like the rumors about the 9 scabbards and Momonosuke and everything else like that. Toko hears this and ends up laughing about it. which she can't help. I'm like, dude, you created this own situation by giving the smiles anyway. And so she starts laughing. Orochi hears this, finds out that she's laughing at him, tries to attack her. Hiyori, Komurasaki, then stands up to him. And this is kind of one of the moments in the story. This is like the moment in the story that kind of confirms that she is probably Hiyori. That she is very much most likely Hiyori. And what ends up happening is she stands up to Orochi. She just like faces him head on. And then she slaps him. Which I love. And, just like slaps him across the face and sends him flying. And then he stands up and he's just like glaring down at her and like changes him into the Yamato Orochi form. And, everyone is just like, just please apologize. Just please apologize. And she refuses to apologize for this. And for the fact that he tried to attack an innocent child who is her, her, pupil, technically, also essentially little sister in the way that they have that bond, and also just her ward. That was the word I was looking for. Her ward, essentially. And like she slaps him and everything, and he like transforms into the Yamato Orochi form to try to intimidate her. And I love this scene because it is just this like, because Hiyori is, I don't remember how tall Hiyori is supposed to be. She's not taller than Zoro. And Zoro's like 6 foot something. And so she's probably like 6 foot tops, but I don't think she's that tall. She's like 5 something. Probably a little under 6 feet tall. I don't remember how tall Hiyori is. But like this, regular sized woman being, with all these 9 Orochi heads staring at her. And she does not flinch. She just stands there and stares at him, head held high. And like, I will not grovel to you for that. I will not apologize and beg for your forgiveness and everything else. You attacked a child and everything. And, my father was a proud samurai and I will not beg, type of a thing. Surprisingly enough, this situation clearly has not come up before. This type of a situation has not happened before to Komurasaki. And what ends up happening is Orochi then like grabs her around the middle and like is like kind of, thrashing her about as he's starting to like just destroy the area that they are all in. A bunch of the guests are all running away. Robin gets Toko out of there during this time frame and all this other stuff. And then Kiroshiro shows up and he ends up slashing Komurasaki, across her front, which at the time, we don't know that she's wearing blood packs, so it looks very much like he is killing her. And she falls to the ground, and everybody's like, oh, Komurasaki, how could he, type of a thing. And they're like, oh my god. And Orochi is like, that may have been a bit too far. And he's like, no, she insults, and Denjiro's like, no, she insulted you, type of a thing. It's like, what else would you expect me to do, type of a thing. And of course, we end up, at that point in time, because I think it's a couple of chapters again until we see Hiyori, but we're like, she's probably not dead. To be fair, we've seen people take worse injuries in One Piece and not die, and we've seen people take far less severe injuries and die. So it's like, one or the other, somewhere in the middle, depends on their constitution. And, type of thing. And, going into, like, the Hiyori being, Komurasaki being Hiyori theory and stuff like that, And then that does get confirmed because we have it that Orochi sends Kamazo, killer, his assassin, after Toko to end her for laughing at him. During this time frame, they have, Hiyori has managed to escape the Flower Capital, reunited with Toko, and they fled the Flower Capital. And they end up going to the Ringo region where they are being chased by Kamazo. On their way through the Ringo region, they end up coming to the Ohagi Bridge, where they end up coming across Roronoa Zoro, where they come across Zoro, and they come across Kyukimaru, who are having their duel over Shusui. And what ends up happening is Zoro ends up going and attacking Kamazo, defeats Kamazo, and, ends up getting hurt in the process, still protects them from Kamazo, and then, defeats Kamazo. Killer ends up being fine. We see Killer later. And, Hiyori was not very well disguised. I'm like, maybe not wear your really fancy looking kimono and stuff like that. Maybe wear something that looks a bit more shabby to a degree. Even if you are going to go into hiding essentially for a little while, maybe wear something a little more that. Maybe keep your hair a little more hidden. Because you have very distinctive green hair, girl. And, she's got Toko with her and everything. And it's very obvious this is supposed to be Komurasaki. And then Zoro gets injured, ends up fainting. Komurasaki and Toko tend to his wounds as thank you for protecting them. They tend to his wounds in one of the houses in the northern cemetery. And when he wakes up, he ends up looking around and he's like, where am I and who are you? And Hiyori explains that she is Kozuki Hiyori, younger sister of Momonosuke. And Zoro is just like, no, you're not. You are not that brat's little sister. Type of a thing. And she's like, yeah, I am. And so we get that full confirmation there. And we also have it where she hugs Zoro and aggravates his wounds, which is just funny. And, they give him alcohol and food and all of that stuff. And then she essentially gives him a bit of the backstory as to what happened. Of yes, I am Momonosuke's sister. That night in the castle when it was all burning, mother sent me with Kawamatsu. And we escaped. And I was with him for about 7 years. But then I ran away because we didn't have food. And he kept giving me food. And he was going to starve to death. So I left. And then I ended up with... I don't think we get the full confirmation that Kiroshiro is Denjo at this point in time, but we get that she ended up making her way to become this, to become Komurasaki and took up the name Komurasaki. And all of that. And how she had revealed to Toko who she really was, because she trusted Toko and all of that stuff. And so she's doing that reveal to Zoro of who she actually is. But she does not reveal the stuff about Denjiro because she's like, okay, me making this reveal to this guy is one thing. Also, she finds out that he's, Momonosuke's ally and all of that stuff. Because, she's found, the little flyers that's, the code and everything on it. So we have that. From there, what ends up happening is they do end up falling asleep in the building again, and they wake up the next morning, and Brooke is there. And Brooke scares both Hiyori and Toko, which is just funny. And so we have that fun bit. We also find out that, Zoro's kind of giving her a bit of a, yeah, we found Momonosuke, and gives her a bit of an information about what's going on with the Alliance and everything else like that. So... She also, we see that Hiyori is, very excited about wanting to see Momonosuke again. Because, as I said, bear in mind, Momonosuke went into the future. He traveled 20 years into the future. And yes, it has been a little while for him, and he was still much closer to the traumatic event with their father dying and everything else like that. In his own mind and everything, chronologically to a degree, than Hiyori was. Hiyori's had 20 years to kind of process what happened. Doesn't mean she's fully okay with what happened, obviously, but she's had more time to distance herself from the event and has had other things that she's had to focus on in order to get to where she is today. Momonosuke is still mentally an 8-year-old kid, even with physically being 28 years old in the story, currently. And what ends up happening is, Hiyori very much, for Hiyori, it has been 20 years since she has seen her big brother, who is now technically her little brother. And it's now been 20 years for her, and she very much has missed her brother for a long time, which is where I think kind of the bond with Toko came from. It's like one of the reasons she has that bond with Toko. Not that she doesn't just genuinely love Toko as a little sister, but like it gives her something there for like that bond that she had with Momonosuke, and that has been like vacant for like the past 20 years. So what ends up happening is, we get that information, and then Brooke shows up the next morning, scares them, and then they find out about that there is going to be this funeral procession for Komurasaki, and that they captured Tonoyasu, and that he has an impending execution, which leads to Toko runs out. Hiyori understands exactly what happened, and that's where Zoro finds out that Tonoyasu is, or Yasu, is Toko's father. So they are all literally running toward the flower capital, toward Retsetsu town, where this is going to be. And, the group ends up there, and what ends up happening is, they get there, they're not there in time to actually save Yasuie, and this is when Zoro gets the full brunt of learning what the smiles are, of what the smile devil fruits have done to Wano, about this insidious poison that Orochi has given to the country. And we see, because like he's kind of been like, because he was introduced to Yasuie and he's been around him for a little while, and like saw everybody smiling and everything else like that, even when they're like starving and everything. And so we have that. And what ends up happening is, they get to Retsetsu town, and Yasuie has been executed. Hiyori is just broken up about this. Toko is over by his body and everything. And Zoro is just like, why is everybody laughing at this? Why is everybody laughing because this man died? If he's so important, why is everybody laughing? And Hiyori is like, it's not their fault. Orochi has robbed the people of Ebisu town and of the other leftover towns of their emotions because of the smile devil fruits, because of the smiles, because Orochi and Kaido brought smiles to this country. And it forces them so they cannot have any emotion that is not smiling or laughing. And that's when it clicks in Zoro's head as to what the F has been going on. Why they all smile, why all they do is laugh, even when they are just nothing but starving and thirsty, given this world that Orochi has made them be in. And like we have those moments, and we have that moment, and it just makes Zoro angry as all get out. And that is, between that and Hiyori explaining stuff to him, is what gives Zoro his driving force for the rest of the arc. Not that Tama isn't part of the driving force for that, but Toko kind of becomes Zoro's one, as does Hiyori, as part of his driving force to defeat Kaido and defeat Orochi. And so we have that, and, we also have that they're doing the procession for Komurasaki at the same time, and Orochi has it in his head that, if I kill this scumbag, if I kill Yasuie and everything, then maybe it will, appease Komurasaki in the afterlife because he's psychotic. And, so he's going through that and everything like that. So we have those moments happening. And thankfully they are, Zoro and Sanji are able to save Toko. They get her out of there. The rest of them end up all escaping. Toko ends up with the straw hats, with some of the straw hats, and then Zoro and Hiyori end up escaping. Sanji does not like this because he sees Hiyori and he's like, "Ooh, pretty girl. Why is she with Zoro?" And does not like that. So they end up escaping. And, they end up escaping, and they end up going off for a little bit. They end up in just one of the other regions. I think they end up in the Hakumen region for a little bit, and then they end up having getting found by like two of, I think it's not the, it is the Oniwabanshu, I think, the ninjas that work for Orochi. They come across them. Zoro takes them out pretty easily, and then they end up eventually back at they end up making their way back they get to the Enma Shrine, and Zoro is like, I need to get my sword back. I need that sword. I need to get Shusui back. And so they're like making their way back to the graveyard. On their way there, they get to the Ohagi Bridge, where Zoro is going to get ready to fight Yukimaru again. And she hears them talk about Shusui, because Zoro's like, give me back Shusui, and she's like surprised about this. And that is when Kawamatsu arrives. And he interrupts the fight, and Hiyori is just overwhelmed with joy to see him again, because it's been 13 years since she'd seen Kawamatsu. And she just runs over to him and she hugs him, and she's just like, they're just so glad to see each other, because like he had put his life on the line to try to protect her. Literally was going to like starve himself of death to protect her. Thankfully that didn't end up happening, but for other reasons, he felt that he had failed because he wasn't able to keep her safe and everything, and then he was in prison for like 12, 13 years. So Kawamatsu and Hiyori are just so happy to see each other. And then they end up dealing with some of the beast pirates that show up. Zoro and Yukimaru kind of handle the beast pirates, and they find out that, oh yeah, Yukimaru is actually Onimaru in disguise, and he's been stealing weapons from, various people who come to the bridge to cause problems, so that way they then have, weapons set aside for when it's time. So what ends up happening is, essentially what boils down to here is that Hiyori, Zoro is just like, well, I need my sword back, and I won Enma rightfully in a duel with Ryuma's zombie corpse. Hiyori is like, okay, I do kind of wish that there had been like a funny scene where they have Zoro trying to sum up what happened with Ryuma's corpse and Shusui, and just like Hiyori and Kawamatsu, I don't know if you can hear her snoring in the background, have Hiyori and Kawamatsu just sitting there, and like Zoro's explaining everything, and they're like, go back again, you mean the zombies were dancing? And now the shadow of the guy who was in Ryuma is the skeleton I met earlier? Type of thing. Like, just like that whole concept there, like just him trying to explain it to them. It's like, I didn't steal the sword, I won it from Ryuma in a fight. Sure you did, dude. But Hiyori's like, okay, how about this? Shusui is this national treasure to Wano, and we've already lost Ryuma's body. Please let us at least have the sword, and I will give you a sword from my father in return. The sword that my father left me, I will give it to you in return. It's called Enma, and it is a very powerful sword. And Zoro takes her up on the offer. He's like, fine. And at this point in time, Hiyori essentially says goodbye to Kawamatsu and Zoro as they're going to head back to Amagasa Village. Where the heck Enma actually is completely left up for debate at that point in time, because it's like, okay, how do you know where Enma even is, Hiyori? How do you know where the sword is? Because, like, that's just one of the questions of, Somehow the sword ended up in Amagasa Village with Hitetsu. And he's the one who, like, formally gives the sword to Zoro. On Kawamatsu's word that Hiyori said that it's okay. But Hiyori tells him that she's going to stay in Ringo for the time being. Until after the Fire Festival and after the raid on Onigashima. Because she tells him that she just thinks she'll get in the way if she goes. And she doesn't want to be in the way of all the warriors when they're trying to fight and everything. Now in the story, we know that that's complete and utter BS. She ends up making her way to Onigashima, but I'll go over that in the next video. But, she tells Kawamatsu, you have permission to give Zoro Enma. He has my permission to have it. I bequeath it to him, essentially. The thing that that I really wanted to see was, Momonosuke has Ame no Habakiri, which is the other sword that Odin had. And I really wanted there to be something where Hiyori had Enma as well. And I'll touch on that a little bit more later in the next video, because there is some stuff there, like an odd connection between Hiyori and Enma that kind of does seem to happen in the manga and kind of does seem to happen in the anime. And I'll try to touch on that then. But we have it that I really would have liked it if we had like, Enma and Ame no Habakiri being fought side by side together again, where it's like, Momonosuke wielding Ame no Habakiri and Hiyori wielding Enma type of a thing. I would have loved to have seen that. I think a lot of people would have liked to have seen that as well. See the two of them, the two siblings together fighting with their father's swords, defending, maybe not necessarily Wano itself, but like defending Odin's dream. That would have been a great thing to have. So that's what we have. I thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you have a nice rest of your day. Bye!